Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. Proceedings from this the sounds you hear in the background might be the sounds of the inevitable and perpetual construction going on in the nation's capital, because the capital never sleeps. You might, but they want to know what you're dreaming about in your sleep. So I'm down here for the Proud Boys sentencing. I say down here because I'm from New England. I'm up here if you're Mike, or I'm over here if you're on the West Coast. I'm in the swamp if you're a right-thinking American. And I was sitting yesterday in the courtroom of United States District Judge Timothy J. Kelly as proceedings began. Here's what we expect to happen this week. As you know, most of you, I suspect, the 5 members of the Proud Boys went on trial for seditious conspiracy and related offenses involving January 6th. That trial began on December 19th of 2022 and ended on or about May 4th, with a jury returning a verdict of guilty as to seditious conspiracy and 6 of the 9 counts that most of the guys were charged with. Dominic Pizzola was not convicted of 1, but was convicted of others. He was convicted of 7 of 10 counts. So it was largely a victory for the government. Certainly the government won on the top counts. And of course, when you're convicted of a crime, you must then be sentenced. So this week, sentencing proceedings take place in United States of America versus Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Rell, Dominic Pizzola, and I'm always drawing a blank on the I'm drawing a blank on the 5th name, but I represent Zach Rell and I represent Joe Biggs at sentencing. And so this week,
Tario? I don't know if you said Tario.
Enrique Tario, the president, the leader of the. Of course, I forgot the president. No Freudian slip there. Joe who? What's that last name? And when Biden's using pseudonyms from the vice presidential thing, how different is that, a friend of mine? Pseudonysaurus Rex. How different is that than Hillary's private server? Do we really know what communications were going on at the White House? But that's a topic for another day. So the proceedings in the Proud Boys case go as follows. Yesterday, we came to court to argue issues in common with all the sentencings. And the judge will make those decisions, presumably in the course of those sentencings that begin today. And then to listen to the judge's ruling on post-trial motions. We were warned by way of a private email that it would take some time for the judge to issue his ruling. What we did expect is that he would read literally to us in court from what he had previously drafted for about 2 hours and 12 minutes. Now, Julie Kelly reported in a tweet that it was almost 3 hours. I think she's including the break, the potty break we had to have in the middle of it all. But here's the thing that was truly extraordinary. Most judges issue written decisions of that length, and then you read them. Why was Judge Kelly insistent on reading them in open court? At one of the breaks, and what did he say? And what does it portend for the week? At one of the breaks, I bumped into a prosecutor. He says, "What do you think?" I said, "I don't understand why you didn't just hit the print key so we could read this. It's a lot of talk." He says, "I think this is like a confessional." And this is what the prosecutor said. I said, "A confessional? What's he confessing to?" Here's what I heard. It's going to be a brutal week in this sentencing. Privately, probation officers have recommended sentences in the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year range, depending on the defendant. The government has publicly filed papers asking for a so-called terrorism enhancement under the federal sentencing guidelines, requesting sentences in the 30-year range. Previously, the high watermark in sentences has been for the leadership of the Oath Keepers. Stuart Rhodes got a sentence of 18 years on his seditious conspiracy and related offenses. His lieutenant, Kelly Meggs, got a sentence of 14. I had come into this week fully expecting the Proud Boys to receive less than the Oath Keepers, because after all, the Oath Keepers had guns. They had the guns stored in Virginia. They had a boat in Virginia ready to ferry those guns across the Potomac, and they were prepared to use them if they got the right order from the president or from one of the Oath Keepers leaders. This, by contrast to the Proud Boys, who were hellraisers and rally boys, and apparently, at least on the government's theory of the case, planned a riot that took place. But yet the Oath Keepers seemed so much worse, at least with respect to guns, at least with respect to my view. Listening to Judge Kelly yesterday and the delight he took in reading his lengthy decision to the world, and his adoption of every hostile inference that the government offered in its sentencing memoranda and in its post-trial memoranda, and the evident scorn with which he appeared to hold the clients. It was interesting. So on some occasions, when he was repeating some of the rhetoric used, he'd say, he would delete the F word. On other occasions, he would lovingly recite, and they said the motherfucking this, And so you began to get the sense that Judge Kelly was warming to the idea of lengthy sentences for the Proud Boys. And we began, at least defense lawyers, to fear that this was going to be a bad week in Washington. Today, and I want to talk about the terrorism enhancement in a moment, because there was a tremendously interesting exchange yesterday that showed the impotence of the federal court to do justice, and at least Judge Kelly's perception of what a federal court is.
There's precious little reporting on this in the mainstream press at all, which I know that that's something that Julie Kelly was also really lashing at the conservative establishment as well, the GOP, talking about how inept the GOP is at the moment, because she was the only reporter, really there, at least within the conservative framework. But even if you just drop, the Proud Boys sentencing, J6 sentencing, anything into a search bar and sort for the most recent results, the only thing you're getting is really just the same title of an article that is being, broadcast to multiple different platforms, right? So it's just a copy and paste job. And the only one that I can see other than that is necessarily the Independent. And there goes Norm again. Let's see if we can get him back, everyone. Let's take a little break, see how everybody's doing. Anybody, what's everybody doing? There, is he back? No, he's not back yet. We'll see what happens here. He's been having issues with his internet connection there in DC. We're gonna have to figure something else out to strengthen that up. But anyway, let's see who we got in the chat. Uncle Pat, good morning. Dawn, good morning. Freedom Lover, Luttrell, thank you all for being here. That's over on YouTube. And then we've got in the cloud, Jackson Barrett, BTL, Hans, thank you for being here. Freedom Lover as well. Let's see. Maybe Norm comes back. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe this is going to be a really short stream this morning. Love it when he just dips like this. And it's difficult for me to pick this up and discuss with any specificity for you all. I'm not there. I'm not involved in this case. So, what we have from the outside and what I was really attempting to discuss at that point was that if anyone wanted to have some sort of insight into what was going on in this case, and it's something that Julie Kelly had talked about, is that the need for cameras in the federal courthouses, and this is something that Norm and I have talked about as well, is just the necessity, and especially in certain high-profile cases, of the transparency afforded by televised proceedings in federal cases, and especially in this context. What he did yesterday wouldn't have been, as reported by Julie and what Norm is attempting to share with you today, a sitting judge going on a 2 or 3 hour diatribe, trying to recount things. And as I've seen reported from Julie Kelly, that ultimately some of the things that were being discussed or that he was recounting may or may not have been in evidence. Again, tough to speak on the details of that kind of stuff. Ultimately, though, that sort of grandstanding, as described, is indicative of the larger problem. And what I think is the worst part is that if we're not going to have the transparency afforded by a televised trial, the least we could have is an honest press there to report on it. And I encourage, if anybody is in the chat now who has an article that would discuss that would discuss any of what happened yesterday, I'd love to. That isn't NBC News or or let's see, NBC News, Reuters, Scone Advocate, The Hill. They all start with the same title. Ex-Proud Boy leaders face sentencing for Jan 6 attack on U.S. And they're all 2 hours ago, right? All published at the exact same time. So if anybody has another article that is taking an approach different from what is just being spammed around establishment media regarding sentencing in this case, that would be great. But what he's talking about is the fact that there are terrorism enhancement charges that take these things from what he was describing. I don't know if you guys heard it. What he was describing is that that privately, the expectation of those that were sort of on the inside was that most of that they were expecting 10, 11-year sentences in this, but that what Judge Kelly is now doing is making overtures that the terrorism enhancement charges will stick, right? And that those multipliers will force what would be 10 or 11-year sentences into 30+ year sentences. So you guys can give us just a moment here. I'm going to see if I can get Norm. Matt Kyle says Norm's internet is very not Norm. That is correct. And let's see. And Hans, I think you asked over on Rumble, did Julie Kelly post an article yet? No, I actually checked on that. I know that she's got her Substack, and I'll bring that up in just a moment. Jackie, you better stop.
Hey,
what's up, Norm? We held it down. I was just, editorializing a little bit, but you left off by wanting. I think I was talking about the lack of there being, and I'm just going to show for the crew here. This is what I was talking about. I mean, we can look at, if you just do a search for Proud Boy sentencing and you sort for within the last day, look at what happens. Proud Boys could get record sentences. That's NBC News. But then Reuters, ex-Proud Boys leaders, Scone Advocate, ex-Proud Boys, The Hill, ex-Proud Boys, Yahoo, Kilo, KPTX. Everything is the same exact story, Norm.
Well, the reporters looked pretty much the same yesterday. Most of them, anyhow. I saw a bunch of them leaving the media room as I was leaving court, and they just all had this sort of look like, do I dare look at someone whose loved one just died? I don't think they grasp the significance of the story. These large sentences that are proposed are going to be, if imposed, as a result of something called the terrorism enhancement. And I want to break that down for you and tell you the story the media is not telling you. Under sentencing guidelines, an offense has a base offense level, and it can be adjusted upward or downward depending on offense characteristics. The government is seeking to have the activities of the Proud Boys declared terroristic in this case, to make them in effect domestic terrorists, which would result in catastrophic sentences. How does that work, you say? Well, there is a guideline, and it calls for the terrorism enhancement if a sentencing guideline if two conditions are met. That is, if an offense was done to intimidate, coerce, or retaliate against government conduct, and then is a legally significant word. It means you have to have both. And the conduct satisfies or is a violation of one of a specified number of statutes. There are about 50 of those statutes. And only one of them applies in the Proud Boys case. That's not one involving destruction of an aircraft or an aircraft facility. It's not one resulting in violence at an international airport, not arson, not the use of biological weapons, not the release of the variola virus, not the use of chemical weapons, not the assassination or kidnapping of a federal official, not the use of nuclear weapons, not threatening the use of weapons of mass destruction, not using plastic explosives, not attempting to kill, not conspiring to murder or kill, not killing a federal official, not killing a diplomat, not taking a hostage, not using atomic weapons, not assaulting a flight crew, not using missiles targeted at aircraft, not using radiation, not engaging in nuclear terrorism. Do you see something in common with all of those offenses? Very serious. Terrifying, in fact, and they might actually warrant the name terrorism. What did the Proud Boys do? Well, the one count that the government thinks justifies imposition of a terrorism enhancement is destruction of government property under 18 United States Code 1361. And what property was destroyed in this case? What property is akin to nuclear terrorism, killing a federal official, killing a diplomat? The destruction of a crowd control fence that was trampled in the course of the events on January 6th. The architect of the Capitol said that sentence was worth about $32,000. So the trampling of a $32,000 fence in the government's mind is the same as nuclear weapons, threatening mass destruction, using plastic destruction, yada, 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 yada. And so the government wants to seek that enhancement. Now, the first lawyer to argue, who argued on behalf of Ethan Nordine, made the obvious argument. This is a disproportionate and ridiculous application of the guidelines. Judge Kelly said, "Hey, you're going to have to take that up with Congress or the drafters of the sentencing guidelines. My job is to compute the guidelines." And, he all but said he's going to find destruction of property satisfactory. If he does that, he'll be eligible to impose a large guideline sentence. I didn't argue on this point. Severe Conservative says, how long was your oral argument at sentencing? Sentencing has not occurred yesterday. Yesterday, I argued for only a couple minutes. It's clear that Judge Kelly is going to impose the terrorism enhancement, and my argument will be on behalf of Mr. Biggs and Mr. Rell tomorrow. We have the day scheduled for them, and I will argue that these are non-heartland. The application of the guidelines in this case goes outside the heartland of what was contemplated by the drafters of the federal sentencing guidelines. That the seriousness of the other offenses betokened their need to denote these as terrorist offenses. Destruction of a fence in the course of a riot just is not comparable. And we'll see, and I will urge the judge to give a non-guideline sentence. Severe Conservative, I was not on my feet much yesterday. None of the defendants were. Frankly, we spent most of the day supine. Sitting in court while Judge Kelly read a pre-written decision into the record for reasons that I think had more to do with some sort of need to display something to the public rather than not. And of course, the press didn't really report on it. There wasn't much to report on. Julie Kelly promised in her tweets that she would get a written copy of the decision and broadcast it when she gets the transcript. Basically, it will just be a version of the government's closing argument. Well,
that's what I said. So when you were gone, Norm, I said, because you just said a version of the government's closing argument, but I saw something that Julie Kelly tweeted, not the one that posted, rather, not that I have that on the screen. I have what's on the screen there for us, another reason, and we'll get to that in a moment. But what I was thinking is that some of what she was reporting as Judge Kelly having discussed in his diatribe may have referenced things that were not in evidence. And she didn't say those things verbatim, but the way I interpreted it is that he was almost making reference to certain things that may or may not have been argued in open court, or that were parts of the government case that were not actually placed into the record. And not that it matters at this point, but it just seems really interesting that it would be a recast and that he would be sort of on this journey to, I guess, do what? What is the point of all of that?
Well, here's my point. I think we're at a Waco moment in American politics again. And I think this is the judicial branch potentially going full-born Waco. And what am I talking about? Back in 1993, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians were holed up in a compound in Waco, Texas. And law enforcement had reason to believe that there were illegal weapons there, or that he was unlawfully in possession of those weapons, and that the welfare of children was at risk. And there was a corresponding duty and obligation to investigate. And so they did. The result was the place was torched, burned to the ground, and scores of people killed by federal agents who overreacted to what should have been a relatively what should have been a difficult, but not extraordinarily difficult federal investigation and/or state investigation. It was overkill, and the result was that many people began to view the federal government with a deep and dark sense of suspicion, which was confirmed at Ruby Ridge and the shootout that left Randy Weaver's wife and one of his children dead. What we have right now is a federal judiciary and a Justice Department that is considering how to respond to a riot on January 6th and is acting as though this was the British burning down the Capitol in 1814 or 1812, I forget the year. And that's just a disproportionate overreaction that is going to be deeply offensive to many people in the United States. And if the judiciary goes full-blown Waco on this, and Judge Kelly sentences in accord with the sentiments he expressed in his rejection of the post-trial rulings yesterday, you could see sentences in the range of 20 and 20 or more years for some of the guys this week. Enrique Terrio will be sentenced at 10 o'clock this morning. His proceedings and arguments will begin. Ethan Nordines are to begin at 2 o'clock today. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., Joe Biggs will be sentenced. At 2 p.m., Ethan Nordine will be sentenced. And on Friday at 10 a.m., Dominic Pizzola will be sentenced. If at the end of the week, we look back at these sentences and see that the court has gone Waco on these men, and that it's used a sledgehammer when a fly swatter or a hammer would do, and it seeks to crush them in the name of just exactly what, I don't know. I think that will be a shot heard throughout the United States and perhaps around the world. And that will be that we've got a federal judiciary, a federal government that is effectively out of control and is shooting to kill in a widespread way that is unwarranted and unjustified by the facts presented in court. Mike, I didn't hear it quite the same way Julie did. There was a lot of evidence that came in. And of course, at sentencing, a court can consider relevant offense conduct, whether it was part of the trial or not. So I'm not sure I take Julie's point as well taken. But I do think that the application of the terrorism statute in this case could result in a grotesque miscarriage of justice. I think that on its face, the application of the sentencing enhancement makes no sense. Certainly the words say destruction of property, and Judge Kelly would be right in some narrow way to say, because the words say that, I'm obliged to open that door. And if that's a choice he makes, I can't unmake it for him, and that may or may not be a winning argument on appeal. But if he opens that door, he's implicitly saying that destruction of a $32,000 fence is like the use of an atomic weapon, is like the use or is like the assassination of a public official. And they're just not. And there's nothing in the American psyche that's going to permit people to draw that equivalence. And so the hope for at least the Proud Boys with respect to their sentencing is that the judge imposes non-guideline sentences. So stay tuned. It's going to be a wild week down here.
Yeah, and the reason I've got what I have on the screen from Julie here is because this really does go overlooked, and I wanted to give you a second, Norm, if you care to expand. But it says, Julie's tweet says, add to that list obstruction of an official proceeding, post-Enron law, never used this way before.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And seditious conspiracy, which requires no use of force or pre-planning. And that latter part is what struck me, because that's what you and I discussed on the stream. That was, sort of the central theme of, I believe, the defense case. If there is, because there were 5 individual defendants. It wasn't the Proud Boys on trial. It was 5 defendants who were members of the Proud Boys. But for obvious reasons, it seems as though they were using the moniker the Proud Boys to imply, either through whatever means, that there was some sort of mutual agreement to do some things. And the issue that came about, as reported and as discussed, was that it didn't require any active use of force, and it didn't require any active pre-planning, or at least that any civilian would recognize as being like, oh yeah, they were planning for this in advance. It's just, it could happen on the spot. The pre-planning could happen in the moment.
The government acknowledged that in its closing argument. Connor Mulrow argued that while the government believed there was a plan, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, a conspiracy could be formed instantaneously. It could
Which
be
is
the
wild.
conspiracy to use force against the government could have been formed at the moment people crossed the first barricade. Of course, the government argued more, and Judge Kelly asserted more in his ruling yesterday. Certain messages and text messages had been destroyed. And so our government was able to argue that the destruction of evidence or of messages was consciousness of guilt, and they were destroyed because they were inculpatory. That's a little speculative, a little rich in my mind. The other thing that I thought was interesting in Kelly's rulings yesterday is I had argued on behalf of Biggs and Rel that this speech comes perilously close to criminalizing protected speech. That is, that there's no single utterance the men made prior to storming the barricades that was a true threat or violation of the law. It was all protected speech, mere abstract calls for violence at some future date. Judge Kelly called me out, not by name, but criticized the argument, saying that we didn't advance a legal standard. There is no recognizable legal standard for culling out those sorts of statements in the context of a conspiracy. And Judge Kelly is right. Any speech can be used as circumstantial proof of a conspiracy, but we will argue on appeal and if necessary to the United States Supreme Court that in the area of political speech in highly contested and partisan times, there has to be a standard imposed between using speech after the fact to prove a conspiracy for which there was never a plan. And so what we end up with in this case is the worst case scenario from the United States Supreme Court's opinion, at least in Cooperman versus Colorado. That is the recent true threat case where they said, we have to be careful not to have such broad application of the law that we chill people in the exercise of their speech. The message sent by the January 6th prosecutions, at least with respect to the Proud Boys cases, don't go to a protest, at least not if you've been outspoken. Because if you've been outspoken, you go to a protest and the protest turns violent, your speech will be used to prove that you intended to engage in that violence, even if you did no such thing.
Well, and that was why I asked you yesterday, what do we make of the fact that there was supposed to be the prayer between Black Lives Matter and was it the Proud Boys?
I think that somebody's called for. I saw this in the Gateway Pundit that there's a national day of prayer and folks are supposed to gather outside the courthouse today to gather. We'll see how many people actually show up.
But the point of me bringing that up is to say that this necessarily impacts people who are who fall out of favor with the powers that be. Right. The lack of reporting is indicative of people's short-term memory. In that people believe that this, important precedent as applied to those that you don't like or you are positionally opposed to for whatever reason or otherwise hostile to is okay. But is such a, what a terrorized position to be in if you're so slave to that moment that you can't realize that it is a matter of when, not if, that same precedent will be used against you or those that you align yourself with or those that hold your views and worldview in the future. And the fact that there is no reporting on this, that's why the seditious conspiracy, that sort of arc of the seditious conspiracy and how that was sort of really creatively managed in this case is so important, as is the lack of any sort of televised or video recorded.
No, absolutely.
And as is no reporting on it, right?
Well, somehow the press has gone lame on this, and advocates for speech there's a sort of triumphalist. There's a sort of smug look on the face of many journalists out there. Several, one, I'm referring to a European journalist with whom I had lunch yesterday. This person will know who I'm talking about because they mentioned they watched the podcast. This person showed concern, and in their publication, they expressed some reservations about what's going on in the country. But everyone else seems to be celebrating what I think is awake. When I sat in the courtroom yesterday and listened to Judge Kelly's speech, I just didn't hear the resonant sounds of justice. I heard dirt clods falling on a coffin in an open grave. And what I watched being buried was some part of the American spirit. It's going to be a tough week. I hope we get more than Waco justice in the court, but I have my doubts. There's plenty more to talk about. We didn't get to it today, in part, I guess, because of the deep state interfering with my communications here, although I don't really believe that. But there was a Fifth Circuit decision that I want to talk about with Bailey versus Iles, and that is a guy who used satire on Facebook, got himself arrested by a SWAT team. because he managed to poke fun at the local police and COVIDtopia. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Great development in at the City University of New York, where a discrimination lawsuit against the university has advanced because, hey, they don't want Orthodox Jews on their campus, or at least that's the way they behave. And so a group of Orthodox Jewish professors have sued the university. They've survived the preliminary motions, and now the university is going to have to decide whether all people really are equal, or only those who fall within the DEI agenda, the diversity, exclusion, and inequity.
Well, the timeline of this is really interesting too, because I opened up the order from the court here, realizing that this lawsuit was filed in early 2021, Norm, and it's just now getting to oral argument. Like, it just got to oral argument on the motion to dismiss in June of this year, and the order is now being issued on a motion to dismiss more than 2 years after the initial filing of the lawsuit. We learned that the EEOC completed an investigation into this. There's all sorts of stuff that I want us to take some time procedurally to point out, but this is a really interesting case, and wanted to highlight again, this is Jane Coleman over at Legal Insurrection. Great stuff as always. And the reason that this is also on our radar is because we covered the 2023 valedictorian speech from CUNY's 2023 class, and her, sort of white supremacist appeal to, the degradation of society and white supremacy and all sorts of other things. So in understanding the chronology, Norm, that this lawsuit was initiated in 2021, and that valedictorian speech still occurred in 2023 is really interesting to me. So we'll get into that tomorrow. We'll see.
Yeah, warfare at SUNY. Hey, Severe Conservative, you write a great note. Julie Kelly has done some good work, but Shipwreck Crew, a January 6th lawyer and writer, has pointed out instances where she does not understand how federal courts and trials work. Can you tell us more about Shipwrecked Crew, Severe Conservative? I confess that that's not a site that I know. I'll try to look at it today. I'm doing my best to keep up, but the train's traveling awful quick and there are lots of stops on it. So thanks for the tip, Severe Conservative. We'll be looking at Shipwrecked Crew. Those of you who apparently, who want more insight into the legalities of what's going on in the J6 cases are apparently missing a treat there.
Yeah, I've got it on the screen for you, Norm, here. I'm familiar. We don't follow them, but maybe we'll do it live. Okay. 22 years as a federal prosecutor, attorney for 25 plus January 6th defendants, and then so we'll see what we can dig up here. But my remark back to Severe Conservative is that it really, beggars can't be choosers. Ultimately, when it comes to reporting, necessary reporting from inside the courtroom on these sorts of things, that's the issue. Is that even if Julie Kelly, like all of us as practitioners, is somewhat flawed, right? That's what we have, and we'll go with that. Yes, and I know I said this yesterday. The emails were going out.
I didn't get mine. Did I get excluded from the league? What happened?
They'll go out today.
Here's what I want to know, Mike. When is the draft?
Well, I mean, what do we want to do? We want to do Labor Day, the 4th, Monday, the 4th.
Yeah, that'll give me a little bit of time. Yeah, sure, good. I was worried it's going to be like tomorrow or the next.
No. We'll schedule it for the 4th. We got to give people some time to get into the league, and it's going to be, very, very straightforward. And then we'll probably just do sort of snake draft.
I don't know what a snake draft is.
It's just, you're randomly assigned an order, and then you go chronological, reverse chronological, all the way. It's just a snake.
I thought I had the first 12 picks.
It depends on what Judge Kelly does today, Norm.
Waco.
Anyway, so yeah, we've got those couple of stories tomorrow, and we'll open with those so that we can kind of give those some light.
Oh, we might. Let's see what happens today. When Judge Kelly realizes that justice must be served and he gives Enrique Terrio 5 years, I'll have to withdraw everything I said about the threat of Waco justice and the smell of napalm in the courtroom.
This stream will be pulled off the internet forever. So go ahead and save it. If you're watching, follow us on X at LawPod Daily. Norm and I are talking about something that may be, I don't know, not too substantial of a change, but at least interesting. To add some value on that platform. We're really trying to build our following and congregate there. And then how to find us. Otherwise, every day we're here, 8 a.m. Eastern time. Norm's internet connection is only going to be somewhat shoddy this week while he's in DC. But we're here, Rumble Video, YouTube Live, and live broadcast on X at LawPod Daily. Again, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, etc. Wherever you are, give us a thumbs up, like the video, maybe share it, make sure you're subscribed, all of that good stuff. And if you're on the audio-only platforms, leave us 5 stars and a good review.
Or leave us alone.
That's right. That's right. All right, Norm. Good as always to see you. Good luck today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yep.
Bye.